Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to employ uniform language before making final decisions about these statements, where they should be and what their labels are. I say that because I think employing uniform language might help me to see the objective logic that is there or not there in the argument. Now, keep in mind that you might decide that you don't like your argument, that it's not a good argument, that the logic's not tight, that some things, you thought something supported something, but it doesn't. Um, oh, and don't forget, guys, that you might have irrelevant statements that have nothing, that do nothing to support the conclusion. So don't forget about that as well. But your job is to not to improve it or evaluate your argument. We're not doing that. We're just analyzing it and seeing what its parts are. So I think employing uniform language can be very helpful in making final decisions, because uniform language can help you to see any logic that might be there. So let's see what we can apply. According to Dr. C, eulogize refers to the communicative act of honoring and praising someone who has passed on. Nothing to do there. We should eulogize only those who are honorable and worthy of high praise. Nothing to do there. This does not merely repeat this. This is a claim about someone giving what the speaker thinks is the correct definition for eulogize. This is a claim about what one ought to do. Now, some of you might be saying, that sounds like a command. In a way it is, but we're looking at this as a general moral principle, and general moral principles are taken to be statements as well. And so they're kind of a weird statement command exception. And so this is making a statement about what morally is the case. Okay, so anyone who failed to respect the dignity of another human being has lost the privilege of being honored and praised. That's just more like a general statement or like a general truth. There's no language to make uniform here. Floyd held a pregnant woman at gunpoint. So do we say, look at Floyd. We know there could be anybody who could have the last name Floyd. And while there might be more than one person named George Floyd, we can be more precise here by going ahead and stating George Floyd. Okay. All right. So this is an act that treated her as a mere means to an end. So what do they mean, this is an act? Which act are they talking about? They're talking about George Floyd holding a pregnant woman at gunpoint. So this is an act needs to be replaced. Okay. George Floyd's holding a pregnant woman at gunpoint is an example of, notice that I'm having to change the syntax here a little bit while I apply uniform language. I've lectured on that. Example of him Okay, so George Floyd held a pregnant woman at gunshot, so I'm establishing that as a fact. And then George Floyd holding a pregnant woman at gunpoint means, is what I really want to say, means he did what? So I was talking, it's a treated, right? I got rid of that word, but it was there. And not just treated her, but who's the her? The pregnant woman. Means he treated the pregnant woman as a mere means to an end. Okay. So this statement establishes that something happened. It's a fact in history. And this is giving the meaning of it relevant to some other statements that we might have made, right? Okay, so now we've got, when you do this, you violating, oh, was that a correction I could have made? So when you do this, let's go and find that in here. When you do this, you violating someone's dignity. Oh, look, remember I said that for minor syntax issues, you can change those, correct them, and that you should, and you should. Okay, so I have, when you do this, I should have said what? You are. So if you have a tiny little thing like that, you can fix that kind of thing. You are violating someone's dignity. So I just left out a verb, perfectly fine to stick it in there, and you should. All right, so now I've got when you do this, you are violating someone's dignity. When you do what? What they're referring to is tr- uh, treating someone as a mere means to an end. Okay, so they're kind of speaking generally. When you treat someone as a mere end, you are violating someone's dignity. Okay, he violated the dignity of a pregnant woman. Who's he, guys? George Floyd. And we'll say the pregnant woman because that's not just any pregnant woman, but we're thinking specifically of this pregnant woman already mentioned. He lost that privilege, okay? Who lost that privilege? George Floyd. What privilege are we talking about? That privilege? So that's pointing to something that was already stated. Did we talk about privilege somewhere here? Or something that might be considered a privilege? Well, let's go to eulogize. It says communicative act of honoring and praising someone who has passed on. That sounds like maybe that is what meant by privilege. He's lost the privilege. Remember what was the conclusion that they were arguing for? He should not have been eulogized. That's what they were trying to argue for. So something should not have happened. And when you look at the definition here in conjunction with the final conclusion, you realize, oh, George Floyd lost that privilege, lost the privilege hold on a second. I think I might have deleted too much. Give me just a second. Okay, no, all right. So we just need to get rid of this word, lost the privilege of what? This already says that he should not have been eulogized, but lost that privilege, the privilege of whatever it means to be eulogized, the privilege of being honored and receiving praise after his death. Okay, so do you see how I use the definition, the words in the definition, to flesh this out? Then George Floyd should not have been eulogized. Okay, so now let's go ahead and make some final decisions about where the premises should be relative to any subconclusions and whether or not we think that this statement here, that is statement 1 in the paragraph, is the final conclusion. So we've got a definition here about, what it means to eulogize someone, a moral statement about when we should eulogize someone. So, that's a kind of a general moral principle. Then we've got George Floyd held a pregnant woman at gunpoint. What else? We've got that he did something, that what he did meant this. Some more meaning about when you treat someone as an end, then it means this. And then there's a conclusion. So George Floyd violated the dignity of the pregnant woman. So what statements directly support that George Floyd violated the dignity of a pregnant woman? Well, it would really be these 3 right here. This is a non-moral claim right here. George Floyd violated the dignity of the pregnant woman. This doesn't say it's right or wrong. It just says that something happened. This is a non-moral statement. Go back to the lessons I did on moral argument and non-moral argument. So the statements that have to do that, so we're looking for non-moral statements, possibly. So this is a non-moral statement about a pregnant woman, what his action to the pregnant woman meant in these 2 statements. So it seems like these 3 statements directly support what? This statement right here. So we're going to say that premise 4, that's a premise for sure. This is a premise for sure. This is a premise for sure. All 3 of these statements directly support this statement. So we know, of course, that this is a conclusion. George Floyd violated the dignity of a pregnant woman. Okay, so now we're going to go back up. We're going to go to our final conclusion. George Floyd should not have been eulogized. He lost the privilege of being honored and receiving praise for his death. Where do we see anything about eulogize and receiving praise for his death, being honored? It's way up here. Notice that these three statements right here do nothing to support this statement right here. Since these three statements do nothing to support this statement right here, we don't want them above that subconclusion. They're going to either come here or maybe even below that other subconclusion. So now we have to change this to premise 1, premise 2, premise 3, and this is going to be a subconclusion. We have more reason for believing that. Since these don't directly support this, there's reason to believe that this has got to be a subconclusion. Okay, so we know that's not going to be premise 1. We're not sure what it is. Okay, so we've got, according to Dr. C, eulogize means this. We should eulogize only those who are honorable and worthy of praise. Anyone who has failed to respect the dignity of another human being has lost that privilege. George Floyd. Okay, so this is taking us from the definition of eulogize, right, to general moral principle about who should be eulogized, to another statement about, this is really a non-moral statement about who should get the privilege of being eulogized, right, with respect to dignity. And then we've got a conclusion. So look at this conclusion right here. George Floyd lost the privilege of being honored and receiving praise. By the way, you can do a spell check. Where is the spell check? Right here. So it's going to probably bring a lot of things. So the labels, don't pay attention to that. But I'm just wondering, oh, here we go, receiving. I before E, except after C. George Floyd lost the privilege of being, so this is drawing a conclusion. So notice that this is about, whether or not someone should receive praise for his death. What does this one have to say? It says something about praise. This one says something about praise. So we know that these two statements are definitely supporting this conclusion right here, right? But it seems like this premise, this statement here, is also relevant to the statement here. So it seems like perhaps this is premise 4, premise 5, premise 6, and then this would just be a subconclusion. So we've got those statements, and then it seems like the subconclusion that we've identified here, George Floyd lost the privilege of being honored and receiving praise after his death. It would seem like this is in fact the final conclusion. George Floyd should not have been eulogized. Give me just a second here. You might hear just a 10-second pause. Okay, so you might, it's also the case that with the subconclusion that it's also being supported by this. Notice what it says here. George Floyd violated the dignity of the pregnant woman. So this is a subconclusion. These three statements support this statement, but then this statement here is being used with these statements here to get to this subconclusion. Okay, so I just want you to see that this statement here plays a role with these three statements to get to this subconclusion. And that kind of makes sense because notice how we have these conclusions. Subconclusion here, and from that, this subconclusion here, from here, directly they said some, in the actual wording, they said that this other subconclusion followed. This is a complex, kind of difficult one to analyze, but still you're getting to the general points that you can use. All right, so there are still some missing requirements we need to go over. There are some subheadings, and I also want to talk to you about some extra credit. But for now, I want you to go ahead and employ uniform language and make final decisions. One thing I haven't done yet that you need to do is make sure that you get rid of any question marks in your original paragraph, in your original labeling. So see how I'm doing that? I'm going back in here and I am getting rid of question marks. I should see no question marks in any of your work for this, neither in the reformatted version nor in the original version. So it doesn't hurt to double check. So in the next video, I'll double check to make sure I got rid of all the question marks, but there is one more video. Make sure you pay attention to it because I do have a missing requirement in our last video.